We the People Insider. I'm 412 Anon, and I'm joined today by Breaking Spectre. Spectre, what's up, man?
Hey, how we doing? 412? Doing good?
Doing very well. And Dizzy Kincaid. Dizzy, how's it going?
I will be the other guy.
All right, so what we've got for you guys today is part 2 of a series we're calling You're Witnessing, Watching the Systematic Destruction of the Old Guard. And we're going to be focusing on an article. We're going to be focusing on Google in a specific article titled How the CIA Made Google. And the subheadline is Inside the Secret Network Behind Mass Surveillance, Endless War, and Skynet. And this is by Nafiz Ahmed. So without further ado, Spectre, why don't you start taking us through this thing?
Sounds good. Like 412 said here, we're going to focus on the witnessing, watching the systematic destruction of the old guard. And this is part 2 of the series, and probably going to call this part 1 of the Google side because this thing is expansive. Last time we met, we talked about GM. We kind of did a little bit of a dive on some of the current events here from a few weeks ago and did a little bit of a walk back that got us to that point. And probably more importantly, looked at a lot of the stock buybacks and what that's going to entail going forward with GM. Will it be its demise? Hard to say, but certainly something to keep watch. But today's focus, like 412 said, we're going to focus on Google, which for those on the financial side is the G in FANG for Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Now, I don't know about you guys, but do you guys remember when Google first came on the scene in like the mid-90s? You know, it used to have the old Excite and Netscape and search engines and that. Google used to be a
first.
Yeah, Yahoo I think was one of them, but where are those guys today?
That's a good question.
Look who's dominated. And, you know, at the end of the day, Google has gobbled up so many players in the field to get to where it's at. And so we're going to touch on that here. Probably not today. We're going to look at the groundwork that was laid that got Google first started. And we'll build on that going forward. So Google was just recently in the news. We saw their CEO on Capitol Hill this week, and I think there's been much ado made about him and his testimony, which was less than credible, I would say. Certainly lied about certain things, tracking, and I think we're going to see that even in the early days when Sergey Brin and Larry Page and those guys first started, what their true intentions were. You guys got any comments on that regard?
Well, I mean, based on observations and whatever, I mean, the lack of information that they gave to congressional oversight was basically the equivalency of calling the Google help desk. You just couldn't understand what the F they were trying to tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy just continued to lie the entire time during that hearing. It was pretty remarkable how many times he perjured himself.
Right. So let's jump into this guy. You know, their classic logo, "Don't be evil," is, in my mind, classic projection. True to form with their projectionist mentality. They're doing the very things they say they're not doing. So, again,
yeah, who needs to remind themselves, don't be evil, only evil people?
Yeah, very good point. So again, 412 alluded here. This is the focus of today's article or read today. Medium article, How the CIA Made Google via Insurge Intelligence. And you guys can go either read that on your own or you can follow along here. We've got some interesting insights in that built in. So let's jump in. I'll go ahead and lead off here. Now, Insurge Intelligence is a new crowdfunded investigative project that breaks the exclusive story of how the U.S. intelligence community funded, nurtured, and incubated Google as part of a drive to dominate the world through control of information. Seed funded by NSA and CIA, Google was merely the first among a plethora of private sector startups co-opted by the U.S. intelligence to retain information superiority. Of course, the origins of the ingenious strategy trace back to a secret Pentagon-sponsored group that for the last 2 decades has functioned as a bridge between the U.S. government and elites. Gee, where have we heard bridge before? Across the business, industry, finance, corporate, and media sectors, the group has allowed some of the most powerful special interests in corporate America to systematically circumvent democratic accountability and the rule of law to influence government policies as well as public opinion in the U.S. and around the world. The results have been catastrophic: NSA mass surveillance, permanent state of global war, and a new initiative to transform the U.S. military into Skynet. And again, this is part one. This exclusive is being released for free in the public interest and was enabled by crowdfunding. Thank my amazing community of patrons for their support, which gave me the opportunity to work on this in-depth investigation. Please support independent and investigative journalism for the global commons. Now, mind you, this article was written in the wake of Charlie Hebdo back in 2015. So the attacks in Paris took place. The Western government's moving fast to legitimize expanded powers of mass surveillance and controls on the internet, all in the name of, quote, fighting terrorism. Quotes are mine. U.S. and European politicians have called to produce NSA-style snooping and to advance the capacity to intrude on internet privacy by outlawing encryption. One idea is to establish a telecoms partnership that would unilaterally delete content deemed to fuel hatred and violence. Gee, are we still seeing that today? And situations considered appropriate. Heated discussions are going on at government and parliamentary level to explore cracking down on lawyer-client confidentiality.
I mean, this is neocorporatism, I mean, at its best, right?
Absolutely. And so what any of this would have done to prevent the Charlie Hebdo attack remains a mystery, especially given that we already know the terrorists were on the radar of French intelligence for up to a decade. Gee, does this read like a script? Because didn't we just see that here in the last week or so? Almost verbatim. There's little new in this story. The 9/11 atrocity was the first of many terrorist attacks, each succeeded by the dramatic extension of draconian state powers at the expense of civil liberties, backed up with the projection of military force in regions identified as hotspots, harboring terrorists. Yet there is little indication that this tried and tested formula has done anything to reduce the danger. If anything, we appear to be locked into a deepening cycle of violence with no clear end in sight. As our governments push to increase their powers, insurge intelligence can now reveal the vast extent to which the U.S. intelligence community is implicated in nurturing the web platforms we know today, for the precise purpose of utilizing the technology as a mechanism to fight global information war. InfoWars? A war to legitimize the power of the few over the rest of us. The linchpin of this story is a corporation that in many ways defines the 21st century with its unobtrusive omnipresence, Google. Google styles itself as a friendly, funky, user-friendly tech firm that rose to prominence through a combination of skill, luck, and genuine innovation. This is true, but it is a mere fragment of the story. In reality, Google is a smokescreen behind which lurks the U.S. military-industrial complex. Boy, didn't we get some warnings about that from old Eisenhower?
Yeah, yet now they don't want to help the military-industrial complex. They want to help the Chinese military-industrial complex.
Yeah, a little late for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, the inside story of Google's rise, revealed here for the first time, opens a can of worms that goes far beyond Google, unexpectedly shining a light on the existence of a parasitical network driving the evolution of the U.S. national security apparatus and profiting obscenely from its operation. So, the article continues, talking about the shadow network. For the last 2 decades, U.S. foreign and intelligence strategies have resulted in a global, quote, war on terror, consisting of prolonged military invasions in the Muslim world and comprehensive surveillance of civilian populations. These strategies have been incubated, if not dictated, by a secret network inside and beyond the Pentagon.
It's terrifying.
So maybe this is a question that I have that we can maybe shelf for later. But the question is, right, so we know a lot of these Silicon Valley startups and so on have been funded or tied to both the CIA and military intelligence. So how does military intelligence now kind of separate itself in the Q movement as the good guys, even though at one point they were the startups for some of these nefarious actors? So that's just something I'll throw out there to let hang.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I don't know that we'll technically get the answer to that, but certainly the military intelligence is more powerful than the NSA. And of course, that's a follow-up to this article as well, which we'll touch on, but good point. So, established under the Clinton administration, consolidated under Bush, and firmly entrenched under Obama, this bipartisan network of mostly neoconservative ideologues sealed its dominion inside the U.S. Department of Defense by the dawn of 2015, through the operation of an obscure corporate entity outside the Pentagon, but run by the Pentagon. In 1999, the CIA created its own venture capital investment firm, In-Q-Tel, to fund promising startups that might create technologies useful for intelligence agencies. But the inspiration for In-Q-Tel came earlier when the Pentagon set up its own private sector outfit. Now, that being said, Q has had a little bit to say about that, and I'm not going to get into the details of it here today, but for those that want to go back and research, you can check out Q Post 222 and 1168 in regards to In-Q-Tel.
Good. Let's face it. I mean, someone just joining the movement is going to see In-Q-Tel, right, and QAnon, and maybe have some questions.
Yep, good point.
Not the same.
Not the same at all.
Good call, Busy.
Known as the Highlands Forum, this private network has operated as a bridge between the Pentagon and powerful American elites outside the military since the mid-90s. Despite changes in civilian administrations, the network around the Highlands Forum has become increasingly successful in dominating U.S. defense policy. Giant defense contractors like Booz Allen Hamilton and Science Applications International Corporation are sometimes referred to as the shadow intelligence community due to the revolving doors between them and the government, and their capacity to simultaneously influence and profit from defense policy. But while these contractors compete for power and money, they also collaborate where it counts. The Highlands Forum has for 20 years provided an off-the-record space for some of the most prominent members of the shadow intelligence community to convene with senior U.S. government officials alongside other leaders in relevant industries. I first stumbled upon the existence of this network in November 2014 when I reported for Vice's Motherboard that U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's newly announced Defense Innovation Initiative was really about building Skynet, or something like it, essentially to dominate an emerging era of automated robotic warfare. That story, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, frightening. Absolutely freaking frightening. We should all be scared shitless. I mean, let's face it.
And that story was based on a little-known Pentagon-funded white paper published 2 months earlier by the National Defense University in D.C., a leading U.S. military-run institution that, among other things, generates research to develop U.S. defense policy at the highest levels. The white paper clarified the thinking behind the new initiative and the revolutionary scientific and technological developments it hoped to capitalize on. So this next segment focuses on the Highlands Forum. The co-author of that NDU paper is Linton Wells, a 51-year veteran U.S. defense official who served in the Bush administration as the Pentagon's chief information officer, overseeing the NSA and other spy agencies. He still holds active top-secret clearances, and according to a report by Government Executive Magazine in 2006, he chaired the Highlands Forum, founded by the Pentagon in 1994. Now, New Scientist magazine, paywall, by the way, if you go check that out, has compared the Highlands Forum to elite meetings like Davos, Ditchley, and Aspen, describing it as far less known, yet arguably just as influential a talking shop. Regularly, forum meetings bring together innovative people to consider interactions between policy and technology. Its biggest successes have been in the development of high-tech network-based warfare. Now, given Wells' role in such a forum, perhaps it was not surprising that his defense transformation white paper was able to have such a profound impact on actual Pentagon policy. But if that was the case, why had no one noticed? Despite being sponsored by the Pentagon, I could find no official page on the DoD website about the forum. Active and former U.S. military and intelligence sources had never heard of it, and neither did national security journalists. I was baffled.
Hey, Spectre, not to break you up, but it's easy to get lost in the words sometimes as we read through these really long articles, which are really in depth. But I mean, we get back 2 paragraphs up and look at its biggest success has been in the development of high-tech network-based warfare. When they say that, what are we talking? We're talking like cyber hacking. What are we talking? Power grid, energy infiltration? Are we talking voter rolls, or probably all of the above?
Yes, all of the above, I would say.
And that's crazy, because now that's not just that's a geopolitical issue. Now we're talking about the ability to by proxy, by a couple clicks on a keyboard, right, begin wars where we want, making it look like person X is attacking person Y, or hacking, make it look like, someone else is hacking someone else.
Yeah, and
It's very dangerous.
keep in mind Davos man, General Petraeus. What was he known for? Trying to push the Internet of Things. And so, is it any wonder that something like that could transpire when everything is connected and they can leverage the power of all these things to either do DDoS attacks or anything along those lines for any sort of warfare?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the internet is what? Their greatest enemy and their greatest ally, because they can perpetrate some of the greatest crimes with it. But at the same time, the crowdsource crowdfunding, basically what Q is doing and the movement Q has created, is also their greatest enemy. So we have two converging forces that are meeting at heads in this very unique time and space.
Absolutely. So continuing on, the Pentagon's intellectual capital firm. In the prologue to his 2007 book, A Crowd of One, The Future of Individual Identity, John Clippinger, an MIT scientist of the Media Lab Human Dynamics Group, described how he participated in a Highlands Forum gathering, an invitation-only meeting funded by the DoD and chaired by the Assistant for Networks and Information Integration. This was a senior DoD post overseeing operations and policies for the Pentagon's most powerful spy agencies, including the NSA, the DIA, among others. Starting from 2003, the position was transitioned into what is now the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The Highlands Forum, Clippinger wrote, was founded by a retired U.S. Navy captain named Dick O'Neill. Delegates include senior U.S. military officials across numerous agencies and divisions, captains, rear admirals, generals, colonels, majors, and commanders, as well as members of the DoD leadership. What at first appeared to be the forum's main website describes Highlands as an informal cross-disciplinary network sponsored by federal government, focusing on information, science, and technology. Explanation is sparse beyond a single Department of Defense logo. But Highlands also has another website describing itself as an intellectual capital venture firm with extensive experience assisting corporations, organizations, and government leaders. The firm provides a wide range of services, including strategic planning, scenario creation, and gaming for expanded global markets, as well as, quote, working with clients to build strategies for execution. The Highlands Group, Inc., the website says, organizes a whole range of forums on these issues. For instance, in addition to the Highlands Forum, since 9/11, the groups run the Island Forum, an international event held in association with Singapore's Ministry of Defense, which O'Neill oversees as lead consultant. The Singapore Ministry of Defense website describes the Island Forum as patterned after the Highlands Forum organized for the U.S. DoD. Documents leaked by the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden confirm that Singapore played a key role in permitting the U.S. and Australia to tap undersea cables to spy on Asian powers like Indonesia and Malaysia. The Highlands Group website also reveals that Highlands has partnered with one of the most powerful defense contractors in the U.S. Highlands is supported by a network of companies and individual researchers, including our Highlands Forum partners for the past 10 years at SAIC, and the vast Highlands network of participants in the Highlands Forum. SAIC.
Quick question, Spectre. I mean, when talking about what was that? Interseas cables. I mean, we're talking about our transatlantic fiber optic lines where the hub centers are at. I mean,
Yep.
Do we really believe that all major nations aren't plugged into those? I mean, because it's cited us, but I mean, for real, is England, France, I mean, any major industrialized Western nation not plugged into all of them and pulling all of our data? It's not just the U.S. It's everyone that's spying on. Everyone's got everything. Am I right?
Yeah, I've got to believe that. You know, we've talked about Five Eyes. Q has brought it to our attention. Now, Five Eyes, mind you, we think of Canada, US, UK, New Zealand, Australia, but there's actually an expanse to that, if you will. I think there's 19 and maybe
like
even
20,
beyond
I think
that.
like 20.
Right.
Yeah, it's
So everybody's spying on everybody. It's not just the U.S. Our Fourth Amendment is shot in regards to that.
yeah,
Uh,
globalism is a major incestuous network where all of the governments, they're all sleeping together to undercut and screw the little guy.
Yep. That's spot on, Dizzy.
So SAIC stands for the U.S. defense firm Science Applications International Corporation, which changed its names to Leidos in 2013, operating SAIC as a subsidiary. SAIC Leidos is among the top 10 largest defense contractors in the U.S. and works closely with the U.S. intelligence community, especially the NSA. According to investigative journalist Tim Sharrock, the first to disclose the vast extent of the privatization of U.S. intelligence with his seminal book of Spies for Hire, SAIC has a symbolic relationship with the NSA. The agency is the company's largest single customer, and SAIC is the NSA's largest contractor. Well, isn't that special?
Just to jump back, I think that was symbiotic, because that the difference, the correctness in word is important in that. But dude, by the way, you're tearing it up, dude. I would be just tripping over my feet, screwing up reading like this. Dude, you're a monster, man. Dude, I'm so impressed.
I've read through this a few times.
No, dude, I could tell you, dude, you're so freaking smart. I mean, just your ability to read like this without screwing up. I mean, dude, I'd be a wreck.
Oh, you may have to take over here in case I start to dry out. So stay tuned.
Okay. Throw me under the bus whenever you're ready, brother.
Sure. The full name of Captain Dick O'Neill, the founding president of the Highlands Forum, is Richard Patrick O'Neill, who, after his work in the Navy, joined the DoD. He served his last post as Deputy for Strategy and Policy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Defense for Command, Control, Communications, and Intelligence before setting up Highlands. Club of Yoda. The next section's entitled. Yeah, not to be confused with Yoda on 24/7, by the way.
Right.
The good Yoda.
Yeah, but Clippinger also referred to another mysterious individual revered by forum attendees. He sat at the back of the room, expressionless behind thick black-rimmed glasses. I never heard him utter a word. Andy Marshall is an icon within DoD. Some call him Yoda, indicative of his mythical and inscrutable status. He had served many administrations and was widely regarded as above partisan politics. He was a supporter of the Highlands Forum and a regular fixture from its beginning. Since 1973, Marshall has headed up one of the Pentagon's most powerful agencies, the Office of Net Assessment, ONA, the U.S. Defense Secretary's internal think tank, which conducts highly classified research on future planning for defense policy across the U.S. military and intelligence community. The ONA has played a key role in major Pentagon strategy initiatives, including Maritime Strategy, the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Competitive Strategies Initiative, and the Revolution in Military Affairs.
Whenever I hear somebody is touted as non-political or blah blah blah, red flag right there.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe
exactly.
that's just me. You know what I mean?
Into everything, but about nothing.
Exactly.
In a rare 2002 profile in Wired, reporter Douglas McGray described Andrew Marshall, now 93 years old, again, this is 2015 article, as the DoD's most elusive but one of its most influential officials. McGray added that Vice President Dick Cheney, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, widely considered the hawks of the neoconservative movement in American politics.
And the perpetrators of 9/11.
We're among Marshall's star proteges.
I'm sorry, I just had to say that. Dick and Don, screw you guys.
Speaking at a low-key Harvard University seminar a few months after 9/11, Highlands Forum founding President Richard O'Neill said that Marshall was much more than a regular fixture at the forum. Andy Marshall is our co-chair, so indirectly everything that we do goes back into Andy's system, he told the audience. Directly, people who are in the forum meetings may be going back to give briefings to Andy on a variety of topics and to synthesize things. He also said that the forum had a third co-chair, the director of the Defense Advanced Research and Projects Agency, better known as DARPA,
We
which
don't know anything about that, do we?
no, not at all, which at that time was a Rumsfeld appointee, Anthony J. Tether. Before joining DARPA, Tether was vice president of SAIC's Advanced Technologies sector. And there's a slide taken from one of the Highlands Group's presentations called the Highlands Forum History, which you can read. The Highlands Forum's influence on U.S. defense policy has thus operated through three main channels. Its sponsorship by the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Around the middle of last decade, this was transitioned specifically to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, which is in charge of the main surveillance agencies. Its direct link to Andrew Yoda Marshall's ONA, and its direct link to DARPA.
All right, Spectre, you want me to take over and you want to interrupt me?
Go ahead.
All right. According to Kleppinger, in a crowd of one, what happens at informal gatherings such as the Highlands Forum could, over time, and through unforeseen curious paths of influence, have enormous impact, not just within DoD, but through the world. He wrote that the forum's ideas have moved from being heretical to mainstream. Ideas that were anathema in 1999 had been adopted as policy just 3 years later. Although the forum does not produce consensus recommendations, quote unquote, its impact is deeper than a traditional government advisory committee. Quote, the ideas that emerge from meetings are available for us, or for use by decision makers as well as by people from the think tanks, end quote, according to O'Neill. Quote, we'll include people from Booz, referring to Booz Allen, I'm assuming, SAIC, RAND, and others at our meetings. We welcome that kind of cooperation because, truthfully, they have the gravitas. They are there for the long haul and are able to influence governmental policies with real scholarly work. We produce ideas and interaction and networks for these people to take and use as they need them. My represented requests to O'Neill for information on his work at the Highlands Forum were ignored. The Department of Defense also did not respond to multiple requests for information and comment on the forum. Next heading, information warfare. The Highlands Forum has served as a two-way influence bridge. On the one hand, for the shadow network of private contractors to influence the formulation of information operations policy across U.S. military intelligence, and on the other, for the Pentagon to influence what is going on in the private sector. There is no clearer evidence of this than the truly instrumental role of the forum in incubating the idea of mass surveillance as a mechanism to dominate information on a global scale. Are we seeing that now? Hell yes, we are. Frightening. In 1989, Richard O'Neill, then U.S. Navy cryptologist, wrote a paper for the U.S. Naval War College titled Toward a Methodology for Perception Management. In this book, Future Wars, Colonel John Alexander, then senior officer in the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, INSACOM, records that O'Neill's paper for the first time outlined a strategy for perception management as part of information warfare. O'Neill's proposed strategy identified three categories of targets for information warfare: adversaries, so they believe are vulnerable; potential partners, so they perceive the cause, in quotes or brackets, better yet, kill boxes of war as just; and finally, civilian populations and political leadership, so they perceive the cost as worth the effort. Now, I don't know. I think those three things are pretty important. If they're looking at how they're identifying, disseminating, and launching information war at us, we need to read those again. So in his book, Future Wars, Colonel John Alexander, then senior officer in the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, records that O'Neill's paper, for the first time, outlined a strategy for the perception management, the management of our perceptions as part of an information warfare, InfoWars, right?
Mm-hmm.
O'Neill's proposed strategy identified 3 categories of targets, meaning people, potentially us, for information warfare. Adversaries being the first. So they believe they are vulnerable. Number 2, potential partners. So they perceive the cause of war is just. Getting people to believe the wars of government are just. And finally, civilian populations and the political leadership, so they all believe or perceive the cost is worth the effort, meaning our tax dollars, our human capital, the casualties that we're expending when we drop our bombs, when we're hitting people with drones. I mean, this shit is real. I mean, it took me a while to realize and to wake up and have some emotion that when there's a war in the Middle East and someone presses a button on a drone, there's a child, there's a mother, there's a father, there's somebody that's dying on the other end of that screen. And they're a real person who have connections to family and friends. And unless it's a terrorist, if we're just hitting people just because we fucking feel like it, it's disgusting. Sorry for my French.
Two quick points to make on that. One, does this read a lot like what Jade Helm reads as when that was big in the news back in 2015? You remember all that?
No, I don't. You're going to have to catch me up. I don't recall.
Jade Helm reads very much like what that first paragraph does. It was about perception, and it took place in Texas right around the time that they were shutting down all the Walmarts, converting them over
to the FEMA camps and everything.
To the FEMA camps and all that. And the second point I'll highlight too is, think of this: in the Middle East, you got over in Israel right now, where I think it's Gaza Strip, where they've been basically decapitated by way of what they can use for firepower, and they've been sending up fire kites. Okay, a kite, set it on fire, launch it over the wall, and what does Israel respond with? Take them out.
You kind of cut out there. Yeah, but I'm assuming you said multi-mortars and rockets.
Yeah, all of the above.
In proportional response.
Yep.
Yeah, proportional response. Okay, so except the DoD didn't bury it. Around 1994, the Highlands Group was founded by O'Neill as an official Pentagon project at the appointment of Bill Clinton's then Secretary William Perry, who went on to join SAIC's board of directors after retiring from government in 2003. And I think Q has had a little bit to say about William Perry too, did he not?
You know what? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't recall.
Yeah, I meant to pull that in and forgot to. Sorry about that, but I think that
I can count on you knowing that, though, Spencer.
it's in there.
You've probably forgotten more than I know, dude.
Yeah. So, in O'Neill's own words, the group would function as the Pentagon's ideas lab. According to government executive, military, and information technology experts gathered at the first forum meeting to consider the impacts of IT and globalization on the U.S. and on warfare. How would the internet and other emerging technologies change the world? The meeting helped plant the ideas of network-centric warfare in the minds of the nation's top military thinkers. How very convenient.
Well, and isn't it ironic, too? When was this piece written?
2015.
Okay, so this was written during the Obama administration, towards the end, more specifically after the purge of the military and the indoctrination of it, right? After all the important generals and the people who are actually patriots were pushed and shoved out of the way. One of the few last remaining patriots being Lieutenant General Michael Flynn.
Yep, absolutely.
That's the point for making.
And Admiral Rogers was still in charge of the NSA at that time.
It's just a quick question: does he still hold rank, or is he? I know it has to be head of the Navy that takes NSA, correct? But is he still active Navy when he's acting director of the NSA, or does he have to leave?
I can't answer that question Maybe somebody can provide commentary in the comments.
Absolutely.
So this section, excluding the public, all this is going on behind the scenes, and the general populace is totally unawares. So official Pentagon records confirm that the Highlands Forum primary goal is to support DoD policies on O'Neill's specialism, information warfare. According to the Pentagon's 1997 annual report to the President and the Congress under a section titled Information Operations, the Office of the Secretary of Defense had authorized the establishment of the Highlands Group of key DoD, industry, and academic I.O. experts to coordinate I.O. across federal military intelligence agencies. The following year's DoD annual report reiterated the forum's centrality to information operations. To examine I.O. issues, DoD sponsors the Highland Forums, which brings together government, industry, and academic professionals from various fields. And we'll certainly see that striddled throughout here, folks. Notice that in 1998, the Highlands Group became a forum, according to O'Neill. This was to avoid subjecting Highlands Forum's meetings to bureaucratic restrictions. What he was alluding to is the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, which regulates the way the U.S. government can formally solicit the advice of special interests. And that's the document you see there off to the left. Known as the Open Government Law, FACA requires that U.S. government officials cannot hold closed-door or secret consultations with people outside government to develop policy. All such consultations...
Like the Council on Foreign Relations.
I was just going to state that. Who does that sound like? Mr. Rockefeller and the media?
Yep.
What was his quote? Yeah. All such consultations should take place via federal advisory committees that permit public scrutiny. FACA requires that meetings be held in public, announced via the Federal Register, that advisory groups are registered with an office of the General Services Administration, among other requirements intended to maintain accountability to the public interest. But the government executive reported that O'Neill and others believed such regulatory issues would quell the free flow of ideas and no-holds-barred discussions they sought. Pentagon lawyers had warned that the word group might necessitate certain obligations and advised running the whole thing privately. So O'Neill renamed it the Highlands Forum and moved into the private sector to manage it as a consultant to the Pentagon. Wordsmithing. The Pentagon Highlands Forum thus runs under the mantle of O'Neill's intellectual capital venture firm, Highlands Group, Inc. In 1995, a year after William Perry appointed O'Neill to head up the Highlands Forum, SAIC, the forum's partner organization, launched a new Center for Information Strategy and Policy under the direction of Jeffrey Cooper, a member of the Highlands Group who advises senior Defense Department officials on the information warfare issues. The center had precisely the same objective as the forum, to function as a, quote, clearinghouse to bring together the best and brightest minds in information warfare by sponsoring a continuing series of seminars, papers, and symposia which explore the implications of information warfare in depth, end quote. The aim was to enable leaders and policymakers from government, industry, and academia to address key issues surrounding the information warfare to ensure that the U.S. retain its edge over any and all potential enemies.
That's more gobbledygook BS, because what that sounds to me like, big government, big tech, big industry deciding who they want to bomb, where they want to bomb, just to support their own needs, right? Oh, hey, there's a poor country over here with a leader that's not letting us go in and drill for oil, or there's a leader over here, there's a gold mine, and he's not letting us have any of it. Let's, either hit him with an insurrection, hit him with counterintelligence espionage, or, let's just call him a human rights abuser and, hit him with some drone strikes so that we can launch in. It's just my take. I'm so jaded by the whole thing. I feel like everyone's bad, and it's disgusting that it's to this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, moving along. Despite FACA regulations, federal advisory committees are already heavily influenced, if not captured, by corporate power. So in bypassing FACA, the Pentagon overrode even the loose restrictions of FACA by permanently excluding any possibility of public engagement. O'Neill's claim that there are no reports or recommendations is disingenuous. By his own admission, the secret Pentagon consultations with industry that have taken place through the Highlands Forum since 1994 have been accompanied by regular presentations of academic and policy papers, recordings and notes of meetings, and other forms of documentation that are locked behind a login only accessible by forum delegates. This violates the spirit, if not the letter, of FACA in a way that is patently intended to circumvent democratic accountability and the rule of law.
That's FACA'd up.
So the Highlands Forum doesn't need to produce consensus recommendations. Its purpose is to provide the Pentagon a shadow social networking mechanism to cement lasting relationships with corporate power and to identify new talent that can be used to fine-tune information warfare strategies in absolute secrecy. Total participants in the DoD's Highlands Forum number over 1,000, although sessions largely consist of small, closed workshop-style gatherings of maximum 25 to 30 people, bringing together experts and officials, depending on the subject. Delegates have included senior personnel from SAIC and Booz Allen Hamilton, RAND Corp, Cisco, Human Genome Sciences, eBay, PayPal, IBM, Google, Microsoft, AT&T, the BBC, Disney, General Electric, Enron, among innumerable others.
And that's your list right there,
Yeah,
folks, right?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's definitely a who's who.
Democrat and Republican members of Congress and the Senate, senior executives from the U.S. energy industry, such as Daniel Yergin of IHS Cambridge Energy Research Associates, and key people involved in both sides of presidential campaigns. Other participants have included senior media professionals, David Ignatius, associate editor of the Washington Post, and at the time, executive editor of the International Herald Tribune, Thomas Friedman, longtime New York Times columnist Arnaud de Borchgrave, an editor at Washington Times and United Press International, Stephen Levy, a former Newsweek editor, senior writer for Wired and now chief tech editor at Medium, Lawrence Wright, staff writer at The New Yorker, Noah Schachtman, executive editor at The Daily Beast, Rebecca McKinnon, co-founder of Global Voices Online, Nick Gowing of the BBC, and John Markoff of The New York Times. What a frickin' stellar lineup that is. It reads
that almost seems
Davos.
like, yeah, that almost seems like the Davos elitist media empire, right? The anti-Trump, anti-nationalism, pro-globalist movement right there summed up in one.
Yep,
you got
pretty much.
Your top corporate entities, followed by a few paragraphs down, they're puppet mouthpieces.
Yep.
Awesome. Due to its current sponsorship by the OSD's Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, the forum has inside access to the chiefs of the main U.S. surveillance and reconnaissance agencies, as well as the directors and their assistants at DoD research agencies, from DARPA to the ONA. This also means that the forum is deeply plugged into the Pentagon's policy research task forces. So now, off to Google, seated by the Pentagon. In 1994, the same year the Highland Forum was founded, under the stewardship of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the ONA, and DARPA, two young PhD students at Stanford University, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, made their breakthrough on the first automated web crawling and page ranking application. That application remains the core component of what eventually became Google's search service. Brin and Page had performed their work with funding from the Digital Library Initiative, a multi-agency program of the National Science Foundation, NSF, NASA, and DARPA. That's just one side of the story. Throughout the developments of the search engines, Brin reported regularly and directed to two people who were not Stanford faculty at all, Dr. Bhavani Thurasingham and Dr. Rick Steinheiser. Both were representative of a sensitive U.S. intelligence community research program on information security and data mining. Thurasingham is currently the Louis A. Beechery Distinguished Professor and Executive Director of the Cyber Security Research Institute at the University of Texas, Dallas, and a sought-after expert on data mining, data management, and information security issues. But in the 90s, she worked for the Mitra Corp., a leading U.S. defense contractor, where she managed the Massive Digital Data Systems Initiative, a project sponsored by the NSA, CIA, and the Director of Central Intelligence to foster innovative research in information technology. We funded Stanford University through the computer scientist Jeffrey Ullman, who had several promising graduate students working on many exciting areas, Professor Thurasingham told me. One of them was Sergey Brin, the founder of Google. The intelligence community's MDDS program essentially provided Brin seed funding, which was supplemented by many other sources, including the private sector. This sort of funding is certainly not unusual, and Sergey Brin's being able to receive it by being a graduate student at Stanford appears to have been incidental. The Pentagon was all over computer science research at this time, but it illustrates how deeply entrenched a culture of Silicon Valley is in the values of the U.S. intelligence community. So think to Zuckerberg and Facebook, and now this guy. Is it me, or are these guys just merely puppets?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the LifeLog thing that Q dropped was really eye-opening. Having that DARPA project being shut down at the exact same day Facebook takes hold. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't be a whole lot more obvious than that.
Yeah, why spy on people when you can allow them to spy on themselves, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And we're dumb enough to do it. If you have Facebook app, delete it. Get off Facebook, delete it. I mean, I don't know. It's tough. We have to fight on their systems. We do. I mean, we can't leave them all. But Facebook is uniquely evil.
Yeah, I got rid of my Facebook. Spectre, we're about at 45 minutes, maybe a little bit over. So let's look for a good place to cut off part one here, so we don't make this too long, and we'll get part two up out and out there as soon as possible.
All right, yeah, let me get to the next heading point here.
Okay.
This is long, as I stated, and it's well worth a read and understanding, and that's why we're taking the time to go through this, folks. So, in an extraordinary document hosted by the website of the University of Texas, Thrasingham recounts that from 1993 to 1999, the intelligence community started a program called Massive Digital Data Systems that I was managing for the intelligence community when I was at the Mitra Corporation. The program funded 15 research efforts at various universities, including Stanford. Its goal was developing data management technologies to manage several terabytes to petabytes of data, including for query processing, transaction management, metadata management, storage management, and data integration. At the time, Thrasingham was chief scientist for data and information management at Mitra, where she led team research and development efforts for the NSA, CIA, U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory, as well as the U.S. Navy's Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command, SPAWAR, and Communications and Electronic Command, CECOM. She went on to teach courses for U.S. government officials and defense contractors on data mining and counterterrorism. In her University of Texas article, she attaches a copy of an abstract of the U.S. intelligence community's MDDS program that had been presented to the annual Intelligence Community Symposium in 1995. The abstract reveals that the primary sponsor of the MDDS program were three agencies: the NSA, the CIA's Office of Research and Development, and the Intelligence Community's Community Management Staff, CMS, which operates under the Director of Central Intelligence. Administrators of the program, which provided funding of around $3 to $4 million per year for 3 to 4 years, were identified as Hal Curran, NSA, Robert Klutz, CMS, Dr. Claudia Pierce, NSA, and Dr. Rick Steinhauser, ORD, standing for the CIA's Office of Research and Development, and Dr. Thrasingham herself. Thrasingham goes on in her article to reiterate that this joint CIA-NSA program partly funded Sergey Brin to develop the core of Google through a grant to Stanford managed by Brin's supervisor, Professor Jeffrey D. Ullman. In fact, the Google founder, Mr. Sergey Brin, was partly funded by this program while he was a PhD student at Stanford. He, together with his advisor, Professor Jeffrey Ullman, and my colleague at Mitra, Dr. Chris Clifton, Mitra's chief scientist in IT, developed the Queries Flux system, which produced solutions for mining large amounts of data stored in databases. I remember visiting Stanford with Dr. Rick Steinhauser from the intelligence community, and Mr. Brin would rush in and on rollerblades, giving his presentation and rush out. In fact,
rollerblades. Ha ha. Sorry. Rollerblades.
Yeah. Blowing bubblegum too, I suppose.
What a bunch of queers.
In fact, the last time we met in September 1998, Mr. Brin demonstrated to us a search engine, which became Google soon after. Brin and Page officially incorporated Google as a company in September 1998, the very month they last reported to Thrasingham and Steinhauser, QueryFlox was also part of Google's patented PageRank search system, which Brand developed at Stanford under the CIA NSA MDDS program, as well as with funding from the NSF, IBM, and Hitachi. That year, Mitra's Dr. Chris Clifton, who worked under Thrasingham to develop the QueryFlox system, co-authored a paper with Brand's supervisor, Professor Ullman, and the CIA's Rick Steinhauser, titled Knowledge Discovery in Text. The paper was presented in an academic conference. The MDDS funding that supported Brand was significant as far as seed funding goes, but it was probably outweighed by the other funding streams, said Thrasingham. The duration of Brand's funding was around 2 years or so. In that period, I and my colleagues from the MDDS would visit Stanford to see Brand and monitor its progress every 3 months or so. We didn't supervise exactly, but we did want to check progress, point out potential problems, and suggest ideas. In those briefings, Brand did present to us on the QueryFlox research and also demonstrated to us versions of the Google search engine. Brand thus reported to Thrasingham and Steinhauser regularly about his work developing Google. And I think that's probably a good stopping point because this article is updated, as you see here, and continues on. So stay tuned for part 2, folks, to try and capture the rest of this article. As I said, it is massive. It's a long read, but it's well worth a read in order to gain understanding of the backdrop of Google going forward.
Hey, now, remind me, what is Sergey Brin's nationality? I can't remember.
Don't recall off the top of my head.
Russian.
There you go.
Is he a U.S. citizen? Was he a born U.S. citizen, or was he a Russian national originally?
Don't have that information available.
I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I mean, obviously, look, I mean.
Born in Moscow, Russia.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, but it's all right. Just hand him the keys to the biggest, you know, civilian, quote unquote, civilian-based internet, most powerful company in the world, you know. But you know, our president paid off 2 women, so you know, Russia collusion.
Yeah, there's always that.
Yeah. So great read there, Spectre and Dizzy. This is super interesting. It just, man, it shows how deeply tied together and entrenched some of these big tech corporations get with, you know, the intelligence community, and how dangerous that is when we all go to sleep. How much of this can come together, like right under our nose. It's pretty wild. Do you guys why don't you guys each give some final thoughts before we close this one out and you know, prep everybody for part 2. Dizzy, we'll start with you.
Well, this is the perversion of neocorporatism, right? This is the amalgamation of the neocons and the quote unquote liberal progressives, which is a total smokescreen because they're not liberal and they're not progressive. They're really big government, big state. Pick your winners, both of them. Pick your winners and losers. You know, take the donations from your huge companies, levy huge sanctions, tax burdens, environmental regulations, but you give exemptions to your big donors, right? So what that does is that helps out the big companies to squash the up-and-comers, and then you pervert them and use them, like we're seeing here with the big tech, to be part of your data research team, which basically at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is it's an amassing of wealth, information, and power at the top levels to screw over everyone in the upper, middle, and working and lower classes. It's just all it is a giant play for power and wealth creation at the top elitist, globalist percent. And they're not here for our interests. They're here to screw us, because once you've made $100 and whatever million or $1 billion, you can't spend it. It's no longer about money. It's about screwing other people over, because these people get off on power.
Well said. Spectre?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we failed to heed Eisenhower's call and his closing address. Beware of the military-industrial complex, and look what it has spawned. Couple that with,
Military-industrial congressional complex.
well, and in conjunction, cheap money, fueled by the Federal Reserve. If we were on the gold standard, do you think we would have the ability to spend recklessly and do all this stuff? I doubt it. And furthermore, would these think tanks even exist and leverage the 501c3 status to be able to do this stuff? What did we just learn from the two whistleblowers coming out on the Clinton Foundation? $1.3 trillion, equating to almost 9% of the GDP, goes into these 501c3s. That's pretty significant.
Do these think tanks have 501c3 status?
I believe they do. If somebody
they do,
wants to correct me on
mind blowing.
I'm fairly certain they would.
Unfreaking believable.
All right. Well, I'm really looking forward to recording part 2 of this Google series. I guess that'd be part 3 of the witnessing the destruction of the old guard series. So, guys, if you're looking forward to seeing part 2, make sure you hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you know when it drops, and share the link around. We will catch you all on the next video.
Yeah, great job, Spectre.
Yeah, absolutely.